The last time I used the word sexiest in a video, I got 4 million views. Come on YouTube, do your thing. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a long time, but there's so much to the subject of reef aquascaping that I've been postponing it, and furthermore, it would be really hard to find good examples of all the aquascaping techniques I wanted to talk about. I ended up deciding to only use my own tank as a canvas to show examples of aquascaping techniques, good and bad. 1 year ago, I uploaded a video with my top 7 most beautiful reef tanks on YouTube. Why 7? Well, because although I watched hundreds and hundreds of videos, I couldn't find 10 beautiful reef tanks. And I ended up being much more forgiving than I planned to get to 7, because in fact, there should have been only 2 or 3 tanks worthy of this list. This is just my opinion, of course, and maybe I've just seen too many stunning freshwater aquascapes, so almost all reef tanks look ugly to me. No one can force me to look at a Windex tank to start with. It just looks aberrant, no matter what's inside. The same goes for bare-bottom tanks. I've tried to persuade quite a few freshwater aquascapers to try their hand at a reef, but to no avail. I guess they're scared. The few that told me that they tried seemed both scared and scarred by the experience. I also tried to get a few of them to help me out to figure how to improve reef aquascaping, but they don't give a flying flamingo about reefs. Honestly, I think the whole competition thing gets to their heads. Reef aquascaping is a subject I've been researching for quite some time now, and I try to apply what I found out works out for reef tanks to my own tank. Freshwater aquascapers play a lot with recreating forests and hills and so on, and we just can't do that. Even if we succeed, it would look ridiculous. In my opinion, we have 2 obvious choices: recreating a small portion of a natural reef or a miniature of a larger reef. My tank is neither. If I was to start from scratch, I would never have done something like this. I do like my tank, but not enough that I could say it's a beautiful tank, even with all the bias caused by it being my own tank. This tank has just turned 2 years old, but it's an upgrade from my previous tank, which is an anemone-dominated cube. And this forced me into a several islands layout, because the anemones needed to be isolated and each anemone species requires a separate structure with a different kind of rock. So this ended up being my theme: islands. Having a theme helps a lot. Bommies, lagoon, reef edge, reef crest are all great themes. Having a base concept will help your aquascape make sense and look consistent. The islands theme was my starting point, and I'm going to talk about a few aquascaping techniques that I try to apply to make my tank look better. The focal point is where your eyes are drawn to when you look at the tank. In my case, it's this valley on the right. You can apply rule of thirds or golden ratios to position the focal point, but in my opinion, anywhere that's not in the middle or the extremities of the tank will work. After deciding where the focal point will be, you should create perspective lines pointing to that focal point. It's something you can do with rocks or corals. I haven't quite succeeded. There should be more obvious lines pointing to the focal point. But one thing I did succeed was in creating flow lines. This worked out quite well. It's one of the things I like the most about my scape. I achieved this mostly with corals, and it's something you really need to plan ahead when you're creating your rock structure. The lack of depth is the most common sin of reef aquascaping. To start with, A tank filled with water will always look shallower than a tank without water due to the refraction. That's one of the reasons why I think it's better to put the rock work in with the water already in the tank. Freshwater aquascapers have truly mastered the techniques needed to make a tank look deep, and there's no one that doesn't like a tank that looks deep. I often hear that aquascaping is a matter of personal preference. No, it's not to a large extent. There are some universal traits that look appealing to everyone. A scape that looks deep is one of them. So, how to achieve an increased sense of depth? I'm going to talk about a few techniques that I used in my tank and a few others that I didn't. The first is connected to the previous topic, having focal point and perspective lines pointing in its direction. A sand path all the way to the back is the easy way to create depth. My sand path would be more effective in creating depth if it was oblique or curved. The longer and more meandering the path, the deeper the tank will look. In freshwater, you can raise the substrate at the back, and it's one of the most effective techniques to create a greater sense of depth. But it's difficult to achieve this in a reef tank without a deep sand bed. Another technique to achieve depth is through the creation of layers. Layers make a huge difference, and the more layers you manage to create, the richer your scape will look, and deeper. Each layer should be very different from the ones right behind and before, so it stands out. I tried this in my tank, but I was not really successful. Starting from the back, the focal point is the first layer. I have a large structure at the back, mainly covered in bubble tip anemones, and that's the obvious second layer. Then there's the large rock structures with the milkas. That's the third layer. The sand at the front is the fourth. But on the right is where I have failed. It's true that there's lots of corals in front of each other, but it's a bit of a mess. A beautiful mess, but still a mess. I have some green slimer frags at the back that hopefully will create a layer behind the Magnifica. There's a lot of ambient light entering the tank from the back, so unfortunately the Magnifica positioned herself towards the back instead of on top of the pillar. There's a big Duncan ball in front of the Magnifica, and I'm expecting that the green slimer frags I have also positioned at the front to grow and create a more distinctive layer and enhance the sense of depth on the right side. Another simple technique to create depth is force perspective. In simple terms, just place big stuff at the front and smaller pieces at the back. It was when I thought about this that I decided to place this large Duncan right at the front. So don't be afraid of putting large pieces right next to the front glass. Lack of depth is at the top of my list of biggest sins of reef aquascaping, but the I want one of each compulsion comes at a close second. When you see a natural reef, that's not what you see. You see a small diversity of coral species and a lot of repetition. If you have a large coral somewhere, place a piece of that same coral on another location. Same coral, but different size and position. It will look more natural and harmonious than a random collection of corals. Harmony for me means corals that complement each other through simultaneous contrast and similarity. What do I mean by this? Well, two corals with the same shape and different colors will look harmonious and interesting. Or two different corals but with the same color. They share something, so they create harmony. But they are different in some way, so the composition is interesting and not monotonous. I refuse to look at Windex tanks, and I refuse to look at bare bottom tanks. Sure, there are plenty of areas in the reefs, in the wild, without sand, but the rock there doesn't stand on a glass bottom. I also have conflicting feelings regarding the recent trend in creating bonsai rock structures to place corals. They seem a bit like cakes on cake stands. In a way, it's a lazy approach to aquascaping that doesn't take into account many of the techniques I discuss in this video. Getting back to the sand, I'm a sand maniac. I love sand. It's probably my favorite component of a reef tank. So keep it clean. And by clean, I mean white and open. No coral scattered on the sand. The plain white sand creates an interesting contrast with the busyness of the rock and corals. It makes them stand out, but for that to happen, the sand must be clean. Lighting has a huge impact in how we perceive a tank, and nowadays there's a trend to cover the tank with a blanket of diffuse light. The latest generations of Radions, Philips Coral Care and ATI Straton seem to simulate the look of T5s. It's great for the corals, but it makes the tank look dull, with everything evenly illuminated. The argument that point lighting creates shaded areas that hinder the development of corals is perfectly valid, of course, but we don't need to approach this issue as a black or white problem. I have two Aquamatic angels on each side and an old Max Spect razor in the center as a supplement light. In total, there's 580 watts of light over this tank, and it still looks pretty dark. This is caused by the width of the tank, the aquascape itself, and by the type and position of the lights. The front of the tank looks dark, but the back is very bright. In fact, the tank is brightly lit when viewed from the top. I am always surprised when I see all the light and bright colors when I look from the top view. The Aquamatic Angel's main light source are point lights, and they are supplemented with the blue bar in the middle and the two halos. When I first reviewed this fixture, I said I wished the diffuse lighting component was stronger. I changed my mind. I think it's perfect as it is. I have yet to see a fixture that I like more than this one. Its only fault, and it's a big one, is the noisy fans. I have a LED bar and I attach it to the front wing of the Max Spect razor, and I hated to see the front of my tank so brightly lit. The shaded areas look mysterious and create contrast with the bright areas, and it makes the whole composition more interesting. In a tank evenly lit, nothing stands out. The whole front of the tank is pretty dark, filled with purple milka stylos and monties. I quite like the contrast with the brightly lit anemones at the back and the mishmash chaos of colors of the left side of the valley. The glitter lines are created by the combination of light and surface agitation. The circulation in this tank is in charge of just two pumps, two Jabao CP150 that hang upside down in the aero brace. This means that I have no pumps on the glass, and it's really great. The trade-off is that I have too much surface agitation and it creates too many glitter lines and they move too fast. Many fixtures today still use light pads, and these light pads create epileptic inducing shimmer because the LEDs are too far apart. It's the case of the Max Spect razor, for example. In a reef, the corals dwarf the fish. In our tanks it's the opposite, and it looks out of proportion. Nothing will make a tank look small like a big fish, particularly if it goes from one side of the tank to the other in just 2 or 3 seconds. In pictures of freshwater tank contests, and they make very few videos, small fish make the whole scape look huge. My dream fish is a majestic angel, and it was a difficult decision to exclude it from my fish list, but I know that if I add one here now, I would be constantly seeing the tank as a cage. I already feel that way with the angels. The marine bettas not so much, because although they are larger, half of their size is just the fins and they are not active swimmers. Corals should dwarf the fish and not the other way around. There should be at least a few large colonies in your tank. Place some smaller pieces at the back to make the tank look deeper through forced perspective. Diversity in coral sizes will make an interesting scape. The fish population can complement the aquascape. My biggest fail here are the two yellow heraldy angels. Their color clashes violently against almost everything in the tank, except when they are near the green star polyps or the green slimer, which make me think of the flag of Brazil. The flame hawks and the flame angels, on the other hand, look stunning wherever they are. Almost half of the fish in this tank are Bengai cardinals, and since I used the word sexiest on this video, and therefore it will likely be viewed by a few million people, I need to warn you to please don't attempt to put a group of Bengais in the same tank, no matter how large. I didn't plan this, and this situation is extremely rare and not easily replicable. They will likely kill each other.